Hi, hello, welcome back. My name is Devraj. Today we're going to be looking at the Zohar, the most mystical text of Jewish Kabbalah, essentially. Yesterday I was looking briefly at Liber Al and the first opening lines of Liber Al. I'm going to be looking at the opening of the Zohar in a moment. Just to give you a little bit more information, one of the fascinating kind of contrasts between these documents is, the Liber Al is a very short document, very controversial, quite recent, channeled work, and a lot of people would dispute strongly that this is remotely mystical. Whereas the Zohar is this kind of foundational text of Jewish mysticism, and is regarded with great awe by people in the field. Now, the Zohar was basically written in the latter part of the 13th century by a guy called Moses de Leon in Spain. But some people say that its real source is from a guy called Rabbi Shimon back in like 2nd century Judea. He was living in a cave for a long time, I think hiding out from the Romans. So there's a bit of mystery there. It's also written in a rather weird form of Aramaic, which is a language a little bit like Hebrew, which gives it another kind of mystical twist. It's also insanely long. I think it's about 500,000 words. The chap who did this translation, Daniel Matt, it took him about 20 years and he made 12 volumes of it. It's called the Pritzker edition. I'm just going to be looking a little bit at volume one because it's the only one I have, and the opening lines, because for me, I just dip in and out a little bit of the Zohar and try to kind of read along and interpret and understand. And it's very, very deep, but I have to really sit with it for a while or check out some of the other interpretations of this line and stuff like that. But it's fascinating stuff. Let's just talk for a moment about Jewish mysticism, because I think there's a very useful, I looked it up earlier, analogy or understanding you can do in Jewish mysticism. They often talk about the Pardes, which is a Hebrew word for garden or orchard, I believe. And this word has four kind of main letters in it, and each one represents a layer of interpretation that a text can have. So take a foundational text like, say, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. The idea is that it has these 4 layers. You have the letter P in Pardes stands for the literal meaning, what it's just saying. Then you have the letter R, the allegorical meaning. Then you have the letter D, the interpretive meaning, like metaphorical, moral stuff, legal stuff that comes from it. And finally, the letter S, the secret, mystical meaning. Now, what's interesting here, if you may notice, the allegorical meaning is only the second layer, and that's like deeper philosophical or allegorical hints hidden in the text, such as wordplay, gematria, which is numerology, and hidden metaphors. Now, in Western mysticism, this layer would be the most mystical. You're dealing with gematria, the interplay between numbers, the words have numbers assigned to them, this kind of thing. You've got all sorts of, mystical concepts you might have. If you're looking at Jewish mysticism, you might be looking at the tree of life, or in the Western canon as well, the tree of life and this kind of thing. And all of these concepts and philosophical notions. Now, this isn't, in the Jewish way, this isn't the deepest layer. It's only the second of 4 layers. And I think that's really worth understanding here. I love that this is the case with Jewish mysticism. Maybe I should say before I go any further, even though my name is Sandberg and has the word Berg in it, I'm actually not Jewish. Just to be clear on that, my name is actually Swedish. I'm not Swedish either. I'm British Iranian. I was an adopted kid. Anyway, back to the text. So this is fascinating stuff, I think, and it's really worth understanding that a lot of the philosophy and concepts and the gematria and this kind of thing in a text, that's not the mystical layer. Okay, so back to the Zohar. Another fascinating thing that I love about the Zohar is basically what it is. It's a bunch of old men wandering around Judea, telling stories to each other, rabbis essentially telling stories to each other, and kind of periodically breaking down in tears, tears of bliss at the depth of insight that they have from stories or from meeting characters around Judea. So in contrast to many mystical texts, it's happening outside, it's happening on the street. and it's happening in daily life as they meet some guy who's kind of, a donkey herder or something like that, and they have a mystical experience with the donkey herder, and they weep about it for a while, and then they talk about it, and then the action moves on to another scene. And I really like this kind of concept. I mean, I live in Istanbul, which is in the kind of greater Mediterranean area. And if you know the Mediterranean at all, or you lived around here, the old men will just sit in the village square and chat and this kind of thing, maybe play a game of backgammon or something like that, or boule, but they just sit around and chat. It's warmer than Northern Europe and that kind of thing. And that's what they do. And this is basically what's going on in the Zohar. I mean, they're walking around a little bit. It's a couple of thousand years ago and stuff, but that's essentially what's going on. And I love that aspect to it. Okay, let's just jump into the text. Actually, let's leave. I'm going to talk about just a bit, really, the second kind of teaching thing in here. It starts off here and basically with some stuff about the patriarchs and the Israelites, the Jews who've been expelled from their homeland, and they're like a rose among thorns or whatever. But let's just move on a little bit. So this is a passage I want to look at right near the beginning. Rabbi Elazar opened, "Lift your eyes on high and see who created these." Isaiah 40:26. "Lift your eyes on high, to which sight? The sight toward which all eyes gaze. Which is that? Opening of the eyes. There you will discover that the concealed ancient one, susceptible to questioning, created these. Who is that? Who? The one called End of Heaven above, whose domain extends over everything. Since it can be questioned, yet remains concealed and unrevealed, it is called Who. Beyond, there is no question." So you can see this, it's kind of like a dialogue. Someone speaking and the other one saying, "What do you mean by that?" Or they're repeating back, a bit like counseling or something, And also, it doesn't easily make so much sense. But let's take a look at what this is really saying, because this is super, super deep. And this is what I mean when I say there's two layers up from the numerology and the philosophy. Lift your eyes on high and see who created these. Now, if you read this line, "Who created these?" it sounds like a question, but actually it's not a question, even though there is a question mark in the text. It's a statement. It's saying, who created these? Now, what might this mean? It's what it's basically saying is that if you ask the question who internally, as in who am I, you are being pointed back to the source of creation. So in a sense, the word who created this world that's around us. And again, to the rational mind, this is not making a great deal of sense. Lift your eyes on high, to which sight? The sight toward which all eyes gaze. Which is that opening of the eyes? They're talking about internal eyes. They're talking about looking internally. There you will discover that the concealed ancient one, often called the Ancient of Days, susceptible to questioning, created these. So what it's saying is that this ancient mystical kind of godlike concept, that's living inside of you, is susceptible to questioning. Now, what does that mean? It means you can find the source of creation through questioning with this word who internally. So you can find the God or whatever who created this world through inner questioning. Let's move on a little bit. Who is that? Who? The one called End of Heaven above, whose domain extends over everything. Since it can be questioned yet remains concealed and unrevealed, it is called Who. So, what you can sum up from this is that this word who, when asked internally, points straight back to the source of heaven above. Now, if you contrast this with, say, modern day Vedanta, and particularly the work of Ramana Maharshi, who was like a Indian mystic in the south of India from like the 1930s, 40s, something like that. He did a lot of work, inquiring into the self. Who are you? And he would do this as a kind of meditation on all day long, basically, and guide other people into doing it. Later on, a guy called Charles Berner in America did a similar thing, creating a structure where people they introspect in partners on who they are. Tell me who you are, you ask someone, and they have to really look internally and try sincerely to ask the question. So this is the same principle. What it's saying is really the word who is the deepest word in any language when it's directed internally. So this word who, when directed internally, points to the source of creation, which means that you can find the source of creation by asking the word who internally in sufficiently sincere and energetic manner. Eventually you will come back to the source of creation. And furthermore, it calls this source of creation the one called the end of heaven above. So the question who points to the end of heaven above. Now, that suggests that there's also an end of heaven below. And the next paragraph deals with this. The end of heaven is called who. There is another below called what. What distinguishes the two. The first, concealed one called who, can be questioned. Once a human being questions and searches, contemplating and knowing rung after rung to the very last rung, once one reaches there, what? What do you know? What have you contemplated? For what have you searched? All is concealed as before. So what I think this is saying is, you get involved in this question who, you go on a massive inner journey trying to find out who you are, and you keep on questioning and looking. You keep going deeper because if you can define who you are, then who is it that's doing the defining? Who is it that's seeing that? There's obviously another layer behind. And these layers are called rungs in the text. And this concept of rungs and a ladder is central to Jewish mysticism. And the idea is that you can walk backwards inside yourself. So you've got these different levels of selfhood, essentially. You've got this kind of animal guy selfhood down on the lower rungs. Nothing wrong with that. It's not wrong to be on the lower rungs. But, you're very identified with what's going on and you're really in your energy, very useful state to have. Then you start to move back. You can get the intellectual me, who knows all this information. We were talking about that yesterday in the talk on Liber Al, the emperor, the warrior lord of Thebes. And then you can keep moving back rung by rung, and eventually you come to this Ancient of Days. And the point where there is no more questioning, as they're saying. And then when you get to that point, then what do you know? So what it's really saying is, when you get that far back, the question of what becomes extremely mystical as well. Because I could say, okay, so what is the world? And I could say, well, there's the laptop, I've got this plant outside and this wall and that. But, that's very, very mundane. Now, if that's because I'm speaking from this intellectual self, one of the lower rungs or maybe more forward rungs, I don't like to use hierarchical structures too much, one of the more forward rungs. But if I get further back, then the whole world is mysterious. Just as I get back towards the Ancient of Days inside myself, the whole world is mysterious. So then the word what becomes incredibly mystical word as well. What really is this world? And that's the limit of heaven below. So just to sum up, this is talking about these two questions, who and what, as very, very deep questions that we have within us. The word who can take us back to this Ancient of Days. When we get back that far, then the word what, is used to show that everything around us actually is a deep state of mystery. So this is just a passage from the Zohar and very early on, and hopefully this gives you a taste of like the fourth level, the deepest level of mystery that's going on in some of these texts. If you want to check out the Zohar for yourself, look for the Pritzker edition by Daniel Matt. And otherwise, I hope you got some good stuff from this chat. And I'll see you back again soon for some more mysticism in the body with me, Devaraj. Bye for now.